Hi everyone, this is the episode 8, I believe, of Business of Aspiration, and I'm really delighted to have here Drew Kaufman from Williamsburg / Bushwick, New York. And when Drew reached out to me, I think last week or so, to visit his store, I'm like, oh bummer, I'm not in New York, I'm in Miami now, but I'll be back, so I'll see you in the spring. But I was like, let's talk, because your idea is something that goes against the grain of what we're seeing too often is just copy paste culture and appropriation of things Japanese. And I will let Drew tell more what I mean by that. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. Absolutely. I think probably the best place to start is just like how we got inspiration for the idea. And unfortunately, it starts like kind of similar to too many stories of I graduated from college and like had been desperate to go to Japan. I had studied fashion throughout my 4 years and had always admired Japanese fashion. So I graduated. I went to Tokyo and thought I was going to be spending all my time in the more avant-garde stores of like an Issey Miyake or Comme des Garçons. But when I got there, I kept on gravitating to these streetwear stores that like I'd always admired from afar, but never thought of as my style. And I'd just be shopping through Harajuku or Shibuya or whatever, and would walk into these stores and just be wowed. There was something about them that they had just created this whole lifestyle around the brand that felt so tangible. The first one that really, spoke to me so much was the neighborhood store. I remember sitting in the neighborhood store looking at this kind of punk rockabilly aesthetic with really cool clothes, and all these different lifestyle products that spoke to that same aura, and just sitting there thinking to myself, like, I want my apartment to look like this. I want to be able to hang out in here and just pretend that this lifestyle that they've cultivated is my lifestyle. So I just had that thought at that point, and was just going shopping, and was so impressed with these stores that I'd pick up a t-shirt almost as like a souvenir to remember my time there. So I came back to New York with all these souvenirs, t-shirts, and was wearing them around, and was working in the buying office at Bird in Williamsburg at the time, and was wearing my shirts to the store, and the office, like, one out at and was like, that's a t-shirt, I love that brand, where'd you get it? And I thought about it. It's like, I got it in Japan. I actually don't think you can get it in New York. So kind of had like a little bit of a moment of like, weird, there is that brand awareness, but not a whole lot of distribution here. And at the same time, I was in the office and hoping to get a glass of sake after work, because I hadn't done that in a while, and was thinking about where in Williamsburg I could do that. And kind of realized like everything there was a Japanese restaurant that I could get sake at. I didn't particularly want to go to a restaurant and not order food and drink sake by myself. So kind of had like, oh, that idea seems to be playing well with each other. And on top of that, I was also DJing at the time and listening to a lot of electronic music. I was kind of going through my music library and looking and seeing I had all these really great, headphone, more ambient music in my library. But every time I was asked to DJ, it would be more steady, and I couldn't play that type of music. And I, looked at New York's landscape and realized that there wasn't really an environment for that. But in Tokyo, I had been to places called Kissetens that they were listening lounges where DJs could go and put on any record that they wanted. So I had this kind of like these three things that I was like, oh, they're missing in New York, and like Japan did them really well. How do I combine them in a way that, as you said, isn't just cultural appropriation, isn't copy paste, and started playing with the ideas. And from the get-go with this concept, we wanted to make sure that, we weren't ever perceived as Japanese, but we're very much an American concept. So we just set up some rules of like, you'll never see Japanese characters on our clothing or any of our branding. We'll never name an event or anything in Japanese. We won't use that language. We are American. We are born in New York. We take inspiration and sell products from Japan. So when creating the concept, we started with 5 Japanese brands, and right now we are Japanese streetwear brands. And right now we're working to add American brands, New York-based brands that we feel share very similar values, very similar concepts, which particularly is the number one thing we want is clothing that is not clothing for the sake of being fashion, for the sake of being clothes. It has to speak to that lifestyle that I felt in Japan, that it is, whether it be music, art, literature, it is capturing something beyond just the t-shirt that is wearing. And then from there, we knew we wanted to incorporate music, but didn't want to do it in a copy-paste way. And because it tends in Japan, it's very quiet. People very much focus on the we didn't really want that. We saw our space as a space that people could come together because of shared interests and want to communicate and talk about those shared interests. So when we bring in DJs to perform and play music, we do tell them, play the music that you haven't been able to play in New York. Play if you're sitting on some great ambient track or a roots reggae track, a bossa nova track, we want to hear it. Play your most wild experimental set, but also expect that people are going to come up and want to know what that track is and want to talk to you. And that, everybody's going to enjoy that music differently, and they might be talking to their friend about that music. So create a more lively atmosphere. And then on top of that, just to come together over good drinks, we brought in sake brewed in Brooklyn. That is delicious. So, we've had 3 pop-ups with this formula, and now we're just beginning our 4th. It opened that Monday. Obviously, with coronavirus, we have to limit it a little bit. We can't have music performances, and we're doing sake only through private tastings. But the concept kind of became taking inspiration from these Japanese retail concepts and spaces, and doing it in a way that spoke to the shared interests of New Yorkers, and not just a shop for people to buy clothes, but for a place for people to connect and form a community around.
Right. So you said there are multiple layers here that I would like to unpack, because what I wrote in my book, The Business of Aspiration, is there are 3 pillars. So I wrote about that layer of taste, and then there is layer of community, and then there is layer of influence. So when we talk about layer of taste, these are and then it's linked to the next layer in terms of taste communities. It seems you're creating that. And instead we're looking for Japanese designers and to connect them with local New York designers who share the same values. What are those values?
Yeah, so going from a more curatorial viewpoint, it's actually funny. I feel like we don't look at the product first. We look at, I think music is almost our center point of we as a community listen to this music, so we wear this clothes, so we drink and dance and hang out in these spaces. So when we look at clothing, we want it to have that kind of shared experience, that these are brands that aren't just throwing up t-shirts and expecting to sell in a vacuum, that they're throwing events, they're throwing parties, they're working with artists, whether it be visual, music artists, and that there's a story behind every t-shirt that speaks to forming community, that speaks to creating culture, and not simply being something that people just wear. And I think brands do that perfectly in Japan. And I think there's some really great brands in New York that are doing it too, that share those values. So creating a bridge in which our communities feel like they're in conversation with each other, that, both the graphic design, the art, the music is flowing back and forth, and t-shirts are just one of those mediums that were facilitating a conversation.
So it's basically having that sort of wider context at the intersection of different interests. So that's again different micro communities and niche interests, and there's taste communities for we really like electronic music and this type of graphic design, and these are the people we know, and this is how we come together, and then we do something together. And that's sort of the expression of that context, that setting, basically. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it kind of goes back to sitting in that store and being able to sit in this one streetwear store and feel like I knew exactly the type of person that would wear these clothes, and like what they would do on their Friday afternoon or Saturday morning, whether it be like a person that wakes up, like goes, puts on a few vinyl records, makes themselves drip coffee, attends their garden, and like then comes back, you know, has some friends over, has a few drinks, they DJ, they hang out, of like speaking to a larger lifestyle. And I think fashion has lost that a little bit. I think if you look at the sectors that have really appealed to millennials lately, you know, food and restaurants, as well as like workout studios. And I think they've kind of captured that. I mean, score for Moldy Jam, but say what you will, they were fantastic at creating a lifestyle around going to that cafe. When you went to that cafe, there was this aspirational aspect of like, you wanted to be an influencer in Silver Lake that drove your Tesla to Squirrel to have a 2-hour-long lunch with your friends, and then go stop at the farmer's market to make a fantastic dinner that you'd post on your Instagram. And it was super tangible. And there was clothing associated with like the people that would go to Squirrel that dressed in this way. Where fashion, you know, I feel like it has had it, but, you know, if you look at some of the, you know, top fashion brands, I don't really know what Gucci is selling when it comes to a lifestyle of like what they expect that customer to be aspiring to. Like, are they waking up in like, you know, silk pajamas and walking down to Soho? It's sit at San Ambrose. I don't really get that. I think it's like a lot of like Gen Z kids who saw it on Instagram. So, you know, the one thing we really wanted to do is when you walk into this store to feel that you could tell what everybody in here's life looked like outside of it, and that, you know, it was an aspirational life. It was a life that you wanted to partake in yourself, and that we have similar values and similar interests.
And who you think is doing a good job right now of that? Because like it would be unfair to say, like I don't see that kind of taste like architecture as hierarchical, because now it's more like sort of spread out, and you have all those little like micro communities and clubs, and they have their own lifestyles. And yes, a lot of that looks alike. There is a lot of mimicry in that, like, oh, they're doing this in a certain way, I want to do it in a certain way, and I'm just going to appropriate it. So, and there is also this thing that is like, oh, if it becomes too popular, then everyone can have it and it's not really unique anymore. So that means that everyone, if everyone wakes up and has vinyl and has, you know, drip coffee and has a garden, it's really not differentiating anymore.
Yeah, for sure. I think, you know, aspirational has, you know, two connotations of like the aspirational lifestyle of like, if I only had more money, I could be doing this. But I was listening to a podcast the other day where they were talking about who they predicted the Essence customer to be. And they thought, when they thought of the Essence customer, they thought it was somebody who was working at like a marketing agency, but working 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and didn't have time to go shop in normal stores. So they were buying online, like they were buying an Issey Miyake thing online to treat themselves. So on the side of aspiration, of like, that's not really, that person has the money, but their lifestyle isn't very that aspirational. So on the flip side, there's like the time to cultivate interests, to cultivate hobbies, that for the vast majority, myself included, I understand is a luxury, and I don't have it myself. Of like, I can't on a Wednesday morning wake up and just garden in the morning and make coffee and DJ all afternoon. I have to go to work. But that's still something that I really aspire to, of that lifestyle. So you have it in a different way of like, you have the time and culture part of the aspiration, and those that like, I think the coolest thing you can do these days is not buy a company, buy the hottest company, or buy the product from the hottest company, but work at the hottest company. Because that kind of speaks to like you've put your time there versus your money there. And also like keepers that have said are part of us, which we don't want. We don't want to feel like a gatekeeper. We want to feel like everybody who walks into this store, regardless of time or money, can come together over these shared interests. And that's all it really takes is if you care about weird clothing, if you care about listening to cool music, or if you just want to have a good glass of sake, that you are part of this community just as much as I am, just as much as the DJ we have playing is, just as much as the bartender is. But that aspirational lifestyle is still very much attached to it.
And I think you said something very important, because when you think about how taste is created, and it's the amateurs and the hobbyists that really put time in that, and then you can literally plug yourself in and say, hey, tomorrow I'm going to become a coffee expert. So I'm going to order a bunch of like coffee magazines. I'm going to go online and I'm going to like order equipment, and I'm going to like see who is influential in this space and who is a good curator and where the best beans are coming from. So it's just more about investing time into developing your taste. You're not like born with it. You're just like, oh, the same way you were like, hey, but it's like, I want this in my apartment, and then you research more, and then you just have time to sort of invest into educating an effort into educating yourself. So I think like what you said that about where you work, the company you work, this is where you spend the most of your time. So now you wanna, before the work was not for everyone, obviously, like a mechanism to get you to the lifestyle, but now it's like the same. It's like how you spend your time, what your interests are, and where do you put the most effort is reflection of your identity. So how do you see brands sort of tapping into that? Because not everyone can work at cool places. And what is cool place these days? I wouldn't say that Facebook is cool, or, you know, like, you know, they're the evil ones now.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, you know, not everybody's going to work at cool places. And that is where aspiration comes in, of wanting that lifestyle, of wanting to, I mean, like what, 2% of the customers at Squirrel were actual influencers. But they want to feel like they are. They want to do something that really they can sit there and pretend that this is their lifestyle, even if it's just for a single lunch. And that's what I experienced when I was sitting in stores in Japan. Of like, I knew that like I didn't have this. I wasn't going home that night to my Tokyo apartment. But for a second, when I sat there, I felt like participating in that lifestyle. And I think that is really why we didn't just want to be a retail store. Why we wanted to be a bar and why we wanted to have music performances is because we wanted to provide customers with an excuse to just sit there and spend time without necessarily spending money, so that they could, you know, detach from whatever, whether they love their job, hate their job, whether it's aligned with what we do or totally different. They could feel like for that 2 hours that they were hanging out with us, that this was their lifestyle. And that this was their living room. I mean, from the beginning, all we wanted this to feel like really is somebody's living room, where you can sit, hang out, and just talk about, you know, shared interests and form that community.
And do you see that happening in reality?
I think at our pop-ups, we definitely felt like it was a community. We felt like people came to hang out. I mean, our bar sales so far have been way more than the people that have actually bought t-shirts, but we've had people who the first time just came and drank. The second time, you know, we're like, this is really cool. I want to come back with a t-shirt. So, you know, either way, we're just happy to have people. For us, you know, our number one goal is building a community around us, which I feel like is the opposite when you talk to a lot of, you know, larger brands when they talk about wanting to create experiences in their retail stores. And you ask them, well, why are you bringing in a DJ and serving champagne in your store in Soho on a Thursday night? And it's like, the first answer is gonna be like, oh, build brand value. And then the second one was like, and we hope people buy something. But for us, we really just want you to come in and feel like you are a part of our community, and that you refer to me by my first name. If you don't know DJ, you talk to me, I go introduce you. Feel connected because you came to us because you have the similar interests as us, not necessarily because you work in this industry, not necessarily because you have the money to spend, but simply because you care about what we're doing. And that to me is so much more valuable than just selling a few t-shirts on our first go around.
Totally. And I think what you're saying is that you don't want to, like a lot of those brands, they want to create some sort of exclusivity, but here it seems it's exactly the opposite. It's more about identity and belonging that you want to put forward. So it's kind of like, how do you build that taste community around your store that's not exclusive at all? It's like sort of everyone who shares that interest can come in and contribute or not contribute or take something out of it and so on.
Absolutely. And I think, we kind of practice, exclusivity, because we still, we're talking about aspiration here, and we still want this lifestyle to be aspirational. I think is just by catering to more niche interests of, not, I think, New York retail has been so bland lately because it's tried to cater to the common denominator and not have a specific point of view, where we want to be niche. We only want to cater to the people that really care about weird t-shirts, cool music, and having good drinks. And we're not going to try to expand that. I think this might be like the one silver lining of the whole pandemic is, to be a retail establishment in New York, especially in Manhattan, your rent was so high that you almost couldn't afford to be niche, and that you couldn't afford to appeal to only a subset like we do. You had to try to appeal to everybody because you needed this massive sales, where we're trying to do this in a way that not everybody's going to like our t-shirts, not everybody's going to like the music we play, not sake isn't for everybody, but for the people it's for, they'll come together and feel like everybody sitting there working there is a person that they'd want to hang out with and have a conversation with, and would be, I really hope at one point to say they'd be proud to be a part of our community as much as we'd be proud to be a part of their community.
Yeah, and that brings us to the last point, to that layer of influence, and like the fact that you kind of want every member of your community to be an influencer, because everyone comes in with a certain interest or the certain sort of desire to share that interest as well. But it seems that the way you are exerting influence yourself is not through like having like a zillion followers on Instagram or having your store PR'd everywhere. It's more through curation and through having that like specific point of view, and that lens, curatorial lens, that you curate everything that is in the store around that one point of view, what you said, those set of values. So if you think that curators can be new influencers because of knowledge they contain, how do you see the mechanism of that, the dynamic of that sort of curatorial influence spreading?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we certainly are. And post-influencer is a bad word. Throughout time, there's been influencers. This is just, the past few years was just the first time that you had to have really no other job title to be.
Yeah.
I think one of like the people that I really admire for influence are journalists who write at, New York Mag or somewhere, who I think have great curatorial points of view, who have, credentials to be studying, to be writing about this, and who, honestly, I feel like are smarter than me and may have better taste than me, where I don't know that a few years ago with the just quote unquote influencers, that was the bar. It was kind of like this wild, wild west of the internet where nobody really had figured it out completely of like how to find new brands, how to find new things on the internet. So you created the advent of bloggers who are just really good at doing deep searches in the internet and coming up with something that you wouldn't have found without their, expertise and use of the internet. But now it's really easy to find new stuff that nobody's talking about. And so, bloggers, kind of just leverage their large following to try to almost be journalists of sort. And when it came to go toe to toe with journalists, we all kind of had like a reckoning of like, oh, like they aren't really as qualified to know about these things. And they're probably getting paid to write about these things, where journalists like are very clear when they're getting paid for. So I think, right now with just like everybody could be what a blogger looked like in 2008 to 2012. So influencers adapted and tried to, leverage, like, we have good taste. We have big followings already. But now a lot of people have big followings, and a lot of people without followings seem to have just as good of taste. I think you could definitely separate subject of how Instagram and social media is homogenized to taste. But I think, now when we look at influence and the community that we're looking for and the people that we connect with, knowledge and interest is like a prerequisite of, to appreciate this music or this clothing, you have to have some sort of reference point. I don't want this to sound elitist at all, but you just have to have a predisposed interest. And once you do, I think we'll appeal to that, and we can connect over that.
I think that's a great way to wrap this up, because what you said is, like, I always think that the status is today not in like having money to buy things, but having taste and knowledge to know what to buy. And knowledge can't be accumulated overnight. It takes time for that to sort of, that hobby, that amateur art, that taste eye to develop. And so the status for me today is in showing appreciation for certain things and why you appreciate certain things. Because if you go in and you say, oh my God, this sake is like blah blah, you appreciate this sake versus that sake, that gives you cultural status that someone who doesn't have that knowledge or appreciation has. So I think it's now becoming really, it's not about the money you have. If someone spends enough time in your store and tries different sakes and looks at different shirts and looks them up, they can develop the status that's higher than someone who comes in and buys the entire store.
Absolutely. I think the best thing retailers and businesses right now can do is be a place where customers can come and learn. We hope that we can be like an equalizer in terms of like influence and status of, if you don't know about sake, I didn't know about sake 2 years ago. Like, I'm still learning things new every day. And like, the only way to know more about sake is honestly to drink more sake, which is a really fun thing to do. So yeah, if you want to learn more about sake, we'd love to teach you. If you want to discover some cool new clothes that you may not have heard about, our doors are always open. And if you don't have to be a DJ to appreciate the music that we're going to be playing. Just come with an open mind that some of it may sound a little weird at first, but that's kind of what we're about. We don't want to be playing stuff that you could hear elsewhere.
Awesome. So we're going to wrap up here now, but tell the audience where your pop-up is, for how long, and just like the general PR plug, because it's not a PR plug. You're basically inviting them to kind of experience everything you and I talked about here. And I'll be in New York in September or October. I'll make sure to definitely stop by. So the address again is?
Ooh, one second. I have to pull up the address. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. Well, you can say the name.
Yes. So we're popping up inside of Figure Ground. The address is 389 Bushwick Avenue. It's right off of Flushing, kind of border of Williamsburg and Bushwick. We're going to be here for a couple months. We're going to be open on weekends from 11 to 6, and then by appointment Monday.
Is there a website for your store?
If you want to drink sake, wait, sorry, what was that?
I said, is there a website for your store?
Yeah, million-goods.com is our website. Yeah, so if you want to drink sake, we are only offering that through private appointments just because we're not allowed to have any indoor bars or dining in New York right now. So we're kind of exclusively doing it through appointments. So email us, DM us. There's a link on our website to schedule a private appointment. Otherwise, stop by on the weekends. We'll be here. Would love to chat.
Fantastic. So again, that was Andrew Kaufman from A Million Goods. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you.